The frost came first. Victims were stripped naked and forced outside into the biting Manchurian cold. Limbs exposed, they were doused with water and left to freeze. Technicians stood nearby with stopwatches recording the time it took for flesh to harden, blister, and blacken. Some limbs were beaten with sticks to judge if they were completely frozen. A dull sound meant success. Then came the next phase. Thawing, slowly, often in warm water, watching the flesh decay, rot, peel away from bone. This wasn't madness. It was research. Welcome to Unit 731, a facility that existed outside morality, law, or mercy. Deep in occupied China during World War II, under the command of General Shiro Ishii, Japan's military established this biological warfare laboratory in Harbin, a city that became synonymous with unspeakable cruelty. But these weren't rogue actors. This was an organized, state-sanctioned machine, methodically testing the limits of human endurance, disease, and death. All in the name of science and national supremacy. The victims were Chinese civilians, Korean prisoners, Mongolians, and captured Soviet soldiers. Men, women, children, pregnant women. No one was exempt. The Japanese called them maruta, logs, a term that stripped them of humanity. And the experiments? Designed to break the body in ways that war might demand. Vivisections, surgery on living people with no anesthesia, became routine. Doctors opened chests to observe beating hearts, or removed organs one by one to see which could be spared before death. Limbs were amputated and reattached on opposite sides, or crushed and rebroken repeatedly to study trauma. Infectious diseases like anthrax, plague, and syphilis were intentionally introduced into healthy bodies to test treatments, or more often to watch them die. The facility's furnace ran day and night, burning corpses. Outside, villagers sometimes noticed black smoke trailing from the chimneys or strange smells, but few dared to ask. Inside, the staff recorded everything in notebooks, charts, and photographs. The data was pure, untainted by ethical restraint. And that's exactly what made it valuable. As the war neared its end, Ishii and his team knew the Allies were coming. But they had a plan. The truth of Unit 731 wasn't destroyed. It was sold, and its buyers would shock the world. As American forces closed in on Japanese strongholds in 1945, General Shiro Ishii moved swiftly. Evidence had to vanish. Prisoners were slaughtered en masse, some poisoned, others dissected alive, their remains burned or buried in mass graves near the compound. Entire buildings were demolished, and biological agents were released into nearby rivers to erase any lingering trace. But Ishii wasn't just covering his tracks, he was preparing to negotiate. He believed the true value of Unit 731 wasn't the facility itself, but the data. Exhaustive records on biological warfare, human endurance, and death, obtained through live experimentation that no Western scientist would dare conduct. As the American occupation began, Ishii and his officers weren't arrested. Instead, secret meetings were held with U.S. military intelligence, particularly with the newly formed U.S. Strategic Scientific Reserve. American officials, obsessed with gaining an edge over the Soviet Union, were eager to know what the Japanese had discovered. The Cold War had begun, and morals were a luxury. What Ishii offered was unprecedented. Thousands of pages of research, preserved samples, photographs, and personal logs detailing every infection, incision, and death. In exchange, Ishii demanded full immunity for himself and his men. The Americans agreed. Officially, Unit 731 never existed. No war crimes tribunal, no Nuremberg-style justice. The doctors became professors, politicians, and corporate executives. Ishii himself faded into quiet retirement, dying peacefully in 1959. But in the shadows, the data lived on. American scientists absorbed the findings, incorporating them into classified programs. Among these were biological weapons, research initiatives at Fort Detrick, Maryland, and later, covert experiments under the CIA's MK Ultra program. The knowledge gained through unimaginable suffering became the foundation for future weapons, intelligence methods, and even pharmaceutical research. Meanwhile, the victims were forgotten. In Japan, textbooks never mentioned Unit 731. Families of the dead received no acknowledgement, no apology. China and South Korea protested, but their voices were buried beneath Cold War priorities. To the world, Unit 731 remained a myth, a rumor too grotesque to believe. Yet hidden in American archives, under layers of classification, the truth remained, a truth bought with blood, betrayal, and silence. The cover-up was complete, or so it seemed. But buried bodies don't stay buried forever, and in the decades that followed, cracks began to appear. It began with whispers in post-war Harbin. Locals who had once lived in fear of the strange facility now spoke of the strange disappearances, the sickening smoke, the patrols that shot anyone who came too close. A few former workers, racked with guilt or emboldened by age, began to talk. Meanwhile, in Japan, the name Unit 731 surfaced in rare underground publications. Survivors, few as they were, attempted to speak, but their voices were stifled by a government unwilling to confront its past and a public eager to forget the horrors of war. Then, in the 1980s, an unexpected leak shook the silence. Declassified U.S. military documents revealed immunity deals made with Japanese scientists. Among them was the name Shiro Ishii, along with details of Operation Paperclip-style arrangements, not just in Germany but in Japan as well. The global press took notice. The truth that America had protected mass murderers for data, much of which remained locked in secure vaults, sparked outrage. But more disturbing was what came next. Investigative journalists and researchers found physical remnants of Unit 731 in Pingfang District, Harbin. Crumbling buildings, medical tools, even remnants of furnaces used to dispose of bodies still lay hidden under layers of dirt and time. Exhumations began. What they unearthed defied belief. Skeletons with shattered limbs, drilled skulls, bones showing signs of surgical removal without signs of healing. Mass graves forgotten by history but remembered by the earth. Chinese authorities, now holding hard proof, launched international campaigns demanding recognition and reparations. Survivors testified in televised tribunals describing vivisections, forced infections, and the screams that never stopped. Japan's government denied official involvement, calling them isolated incidents, but the weight of evidence was too great. Museums in China dedicated to Unit 731 opened, displaying recovered instruments, photographs taken by Japanese doctors, and walls listing the names of the dead, many still unknown. The world watched, horrified. Yet in Japan, silence prevailed. No trials, no convictions, only silence and denial. And in America, the files remained heavily redacted. The experiments had ended, but the cover-up was still alive. What else remained buried, deep in government archives and beneath forgotten soil? And who else benefited from the data extracted through this mechanized cruelty? The answers would come, but at a cost. Because some truths aren't revealed, they're forced into the light. In 1993, a former Unit 731 researcher, now in his 80s, stepped forward in Tokyo. His name was Yoshio Shinozuka, and for decades he had lived in obscurity, hiding behind the walls of silence constructed by the Japanese government and military. But time, age, and guilt broke those walls. In a press conference that chilled the nation, Shinozuka described in harrowing detail the experiments he performed on living prisoners, slicing them open without anesthesia, injecting them with lethal diseases, observing the agony as part of scientific protocol. He spoke of orders, of duty, and of how easy it had become to see human beings as objects. His confession ignited a brief firestorm, and lawsuits against the Japanese government followed. Survivors and their families demanded recognition, reparations, and above all, truth. But Japan's courts dismissed the suits, declaring that the government bore no responsibility for wartime actions. The victims were left with nothing, yet the cracks in the wall widened. International historians began comparing Unit 731 to Nazi war crimes, but with one key difference. The Nuremberg trials had punished the Nazi doctors. The Japanese perpetrators, by contrast, had been protected, rewarded, and their research absorbed by the same powers that had condemned Nazi atrocities. As pressure mounted, American government agencies quietly reclassified many of the documents related to post-war deals with Ishii and his team. Fort Detrick, the center of U.S. biological warfare research, was now heavily implicated. Reports suggested that Unit 731 data had directly influenced the development of America's bioweapons during the Korean War, a claim the U.S. denied. But whispers among Cold War veterans suggested otherwise. Some remembered odd field tests, strange illnesses, and orders that never made it into official reports. Meanwhile, journalists who dug too deeply faced silence or warnings. One reporter in the 1990s investigating Unit 731's ties to modern pharmaceutical companies was found dead in his apartment, an apparent suicide. No foul play was found, but his notes disappeared. The deeper researchers looked, the clearer it became. The legacy of Unit 731 had not ended in 1945. It had morphed, hidden behind new names, institutions, and cold calculations of national security. The victims were forgotten, the perpetrators lived free, and the world, it seemed, had learned nothing. Remnants of Unit 731's legacy surfaced in unexpected places. A Japanese pharmaceutical giant, known globally for its vaccines and medical research, was discovered to have been founded by former Unit 731 scientists. Documents leaked by a whistleblower revealed that some of the company's earliest patents were based on data extracted from wartime human experimentation. The revelation sent shockwaves through the international medical community. How much of modern medicine had its roots in the agony of prisoners tortured in secret? Pressure mounted for global medical associations to investigate. Some journals issued quiet retractions of studies conducted in post-war Japan, while others began tracing citations back to papers authored by men who once dissected living humans for data. Yet no formal action was taken. The companies involved distanced themselves, stating that the past was buried and irrelevant. But for the victims' families, the past was anything but irrelevant. In China, survivors' groups intensified their calls for justice. In 2002, a massive civil lawsuit was filed against the Japanese government in a Tokyo court. Hundreds of plaintiffs demanded compensation, official apologies, and for the names of all Unit 731 personnel to be declassified and made public. The trial was brutal. Former victims testified about the experiments: fetuses removed from wombs to test disease transmission, prisoners' lungs injected with chemicals to simulate battlefield gas attacks, deliberate starvation to monitor organ failure. The Japanese government's response was chilling: denial. Lawyers argued that there was no conclusive evidence that the state had directed such activities, and even if such acts occurred, the statute of limitations had expired. The court ultimately acknowledged the existence of Unit 731 and its crimes, but rejected the plaintiffs' demands for compensation. No justice. No closure. The ruling reignited rage across East Asia. Mass protests erupted in Beijing and Seoul. Nationalist tensions flared. But behind the outrage, a darker realization took hold, that the true history of Unit 731 would remain obscured, not just by Japan, but by every power that had profited from its horrors. In Washington, files on post-war dealings with Ishii remained classified. What secrets still lay inside those documents? What did the U.S. truly gain in exchange for immunity? And what lengths had been taken to keep it hidden? The answers remained locked away, but not forever, because even the darkest truths, suppressed for decades, eventually find light. A hacker collective known only as Nocturne breached a secured archive belonging to the U.S. Department of Defense. Among the thousands of files leaked onto the dark web was a folder labeled Operation Paper Wall. Inside were communications between U.S. military intelligence and Shiro Ishii, dating back to 1947. The files confirmed what many had long suspected. America not only knew the full extent of Unit 731's atrocities, but actively sought the data for use in its own biowarfare programs. One memo, signed by a senior official at Fort Detrick, described Ishii's work as indispensable for accelerating our own capabilities in biological agents. Another chilling document detailed payments made to former Unit 731 officers under covert contracts, allowing them to conduct continued studies in new labs funded by U.S. proxies. The internet erupted. Investigative journalists quickly traced the flow of money and found shell companies operating in Japan and the Philippines, all tied back to intelligence fronts. Even more disturbing was a 1952 report discussing live field tests of biological agents in the Korean peninsula, implicating not only Japanese data, but possible deployment. The US government issued no statement. The leaked files were declared a threat to national security and scrubbed from public platforms. But the damage was done. The world now had irrefutable proof of the cover-up and its continuation into modern times. Meanwhile, in China, construction began on a massive memorial complex at the site of Unit 731's former headquarters. As workers excavated deeper into the earth, they unearthed dozens more mass graves. Forensic experts found not only bones but surgical tools, preserved samples, and sealed containers filled with unknown substances. Some appeared to be remnants of experimental chemical agents. Testing revealed traces of pathogens long believed eradicated. The discovery triggered a public health scare and forced international observers to acknowledge that the ghosts of Unit 731 weren't just historical. They were biological, environmental, and possibly still dangerous. Suddenly, the question wasn't just who had covered up the past. It was whether the past was truly over. Had the pathogens survived? Were they replicated? Had the knowledge gained from atrocity become embedded in modern science and warfare in ways no one could undo? In the shadows, an even darker realization began to take shape. Some atrocities never end. They evolve. The fallout from the Operation Paperwall leaks sent intelligence agencies scrambling. Behind closed doors, high-level meetings were held across Washington, Tokyo, and Beijing. Officially, governments denied the validity of the documents. Privately, damage control began. Former operatives, long retired, were quietly contacted. Archives were relocated. Several researchers tied to early post-war bioweapons programs suddenly vanished from public life, but while the political machinery moved to suppress, survivors and activists pressed forward. In Tokyo, a former nurse from Unit 731's medical division, now in her 90s, broke her silence. She recalled nights of screams echoing through the corridors, bodies carted out before dawn, and the strange vials doctors guarded with their lives. Most haunting was her recollection of Protocol 6, an experiment so secret that even many within the unit knew only whispers. According to her testimony, Protocol 6 involved engineered pathogens designed for genetic targeting, diseases tailored to attack specific ethnic groups. The nurse claimed that some early trials involved prisoners separated by region and blood type, with different pathogens introduced and their effects meticulously recorded. Her account was met with immediate denial from Japanese officials, who insisted such research was scientifically impossible at the time. Yet the leaked US documents included a progress report from 1951 titled Ethnobiological Vectors, drawing directly from data obtained from Ishii's team. The implications were horrifying. It meant Unit 731's reach extended not only into the past, but into the genetic future, a future where warfare could become selective, silent, and deniable. In response, the United Nations launched a limited inquiry, but without cooperation from Japan or the US, the investigation stalled. Meanwhile, independent researchers warned that remnants of Unit 731's pathogens, unearthed during recent excavations, might still pose a threat. Several scientists who studied the preserved samples reported strange illnesses, but their findings were suppressed. One died mysteriously in a car accident. Another disappeared en route to a conference in Berlin. The message was clear. Someone wanted Unit 731 buried permanently. But the veil was tearing. The question now was not just what had happened, but who was still using this knowledge, in what labs, for what ends. Because war evolves, and so does science born from cruelty. After 1 year, a documentary crew gained rare access to the ruins of the Pingfang compound, the original site of Unit 731. What began as a historical project quickly turned into something else. Using ground-penetrating radar, they discovered a sealed underground chamber beneath the main facility, a section absent from all previously known blueprints. With permission from local authorities, excavation began. What they uncovered was a subterranean operating theater perfectly preserved. Rusted surgical tables, shelves filled with sealed jars, and walls lined with faded charts written in Japanese characters filled the room. Among the artifacts were canisters marked with biohazard symbols, long before such markings were internationally standardized, but it was a film reel, labeled Trial Series D, that froze the team. The footage, degraded but viewable, showed black and white images of human subjects, malnourished, restrained, their eyes wide with terror. Japanese doctors, faces obscured by masks, performed procedures as others took notes. There was no sound, but the horror was unmistakable. The reel ended with close-up shots of documents, charts and test results, all numbered and coded. The film was turned over to Chinese authorities, but copies had already been made. When a short clip leaked online, it went viral. Outrage spread across the globe. Activists demanded immediate action. Japan's government once again issued a statement of regret but denied official responsibility. The United States remained silent. Pressure mounted for international tribunals, but without cooperation, no legal action was possible. Meanwhile, the film's contents were analyzed. A linguist identified one of the documents in the footage. It referenced a pathogen designated N45, theorized to cause rapid neurological degradation. Days later, an anonymous source leaked a current research Arch paper, authored in 2017, discussing a similar compound being tested for non-lethal crowd control purposes. The lead author was a researcher at a U.S. defense contractor known for bioengineering work. His grandfather, a known associate of Shiro Ishii, connections formed, bloodlines traced. The disturbing possibility emerged that the descendants of Unit 731's personnel had not only survived but thrived, and were now embedded in the very institutions tasked with protecting global health and security. The sins of the fathers, it seemed, were not buried, they had been institutionalized, and the line between past atrocity and present practice was blurring beyond recognition. A cluster of neurological illness cases emerged in a rural province of eastern China, near the ruins of Pingfang. Victims exhibited rapid-onset dementia, tremors and violent seizures. All cases resulted in death within weeks. Chinese health officials initially suspected environmental toxins, but autopsies revealed a pathogen unlike any previously documented, a virus with markers of engineered origin. Genetic analysis stunned virologists. The virus shared 87% of its genome with strains linked to ancient samples recovered from Unit 731's underground chamber. Panic ensued behind the scenes. The World Health Organization dispatched experts under the pretense of investigating a rare outbreak. Quietly, samples were sent to labs in Geneva, London, and Washington. Internal memos leaked by a WHO insider revealed that all labs agreed on one fact: this was not a naturally occurring virus. It had been designed. But who released it? Officially, no comment was made. Unofficially, intelligence agencies suspected two possibilities: accidental exposure from the recent excavation or a deliberate test. Either option was horrifying. Whispers of Project N45 circulated in intelligence communities, echoing the virus name found in the Unit 731 footage. The Chinese government, enraged, accused foreign actors of bioterrorism. Japan denied any involvement. The United States, under mounting scrutiny, offered limited cooperation but refused to release classified documents related to post-war biological research. International tensions soared. In the background, a private security firm contracted by the U.S. Department of Defense launched an operation to secure all remaining artifacts from Unit 731's ruins, under the justification of preventing bioweapon proliferation. Locals reported convoys moving under cover of night. Some claimed to see men in hazmat suits entering the underground chambers. Shortly afterward, the entire site was sealed off, and satellite imagery showed construction of a large containment structure over the area. When journalists attempted to approach, they were detained or turned away. One drone operator who captured footage of the excavation disappeared days later. His footage was never found. The world was forced to confront an impossible truth. The legacy of Unit 731 was not dead. It was alive, mutable, and still valuable. The experiments had not ended in 1945. They had been inherited, and somewhere in labs hidden from public view, that knowledge was evolving, waiting for its next use. An encrypted email reached several investigative journalists across Asia, Europe, and North America. The sender's identity was masked, but the message was clear. They've weaponized N45. Not for war, for control. Attached were files labeled Monarch Protocol 731R. Inside, a trove of documents, video stills, and audio logs revealed a continuation of Unit 731's research under a modern guise. The documents traced a direct lineage from post-war Japanese scientists to a covert bioresearch program operating jointly between undisclosed laboratories in Alaska, Nevada, and a Pacific island identified only by grid coordinates. These facilities, funded by private defense contractors with deep ties to both American and Japanese political elites, focused on next-generation neurological influence agents, pathogens designed not to kill but to alter human behavior. The notes referenced past Unit 731 trials as the foundation model with a chilling goal: mass behavioral modification via airborne viral vectors. The implications were staggering. Was this the endgame of Unit 731? Not just to break the body, but to conquer the mind? The audio logs deepened the dread. One scientist in a panicked voice detailed early human tests conducted on inmates from secretive black site prisons. He described personality shifts, docility, aggression on command, controlled with precision. "It's not infection, it's programming," he said. The final log ended abruptly with the man stating, "They're cleaning house. I don't have much time." Days after the leak, 2 of the journalists who received the files died under suspicious circumstances, one from an apparent overdose, the other in a staged robbery. The rest went into hiding. But fragments of the data reached the public. Independent analysts confirmed the documents' authenticity, linking them to decommissioned U.S. biological projects and referencing obscure legislation that quietly funded non-lethal pacification research. Public response was limited. The world was in chaos. A pandemic raged, governments enforced lockdowns, and fear controlled the narrative. Some questioned, was this pandemic connected to Monarch Protocol? Had Unit 731's legacy finally reached global scale? Authorities dismissed such claims as conspiracy, but the timing, the pathogen's unknown origin, and the suppression of investigation fed growing suspicion. The nightmare was no longer confined to history. It was now embedded in the present, silent, systemic, and invisible. And the true cost of silence after 1945 was finally being paid. Underground forums exploded with debate and panic over a single leaked image. Satellite footage showing the Pacific island mentioned in the Monarch Protocol files. The coordinates led to a tiny, unmarked landmass in the North Pacific, surrounded by restricted airspace and naval activity. Visible on the island was a large, dome-shaped facility, flanked by smaller structures and what appeared to be an airstrip. The island had no official name, no record in maritime navigation charts, and was scrubbed from commercial satellite maps. But it existed. Amateur analysts compared the facility's layout to that of known biological containment labs, specifically high-security BSL-4 labs designed for handling the most dangerous pathogens. The implications were immediate. Monarch Protocol was not theory. It was operational. As digital investigators continued digging, they discovered procurement contracts linking several biotech firms to construction projects on the island, under codenames like Project Solace and Harvest Initiative. The contractors' boards were stacked with individuals tied to post-war defense research, pharmaceutical giants, and members of advisory councils once associated with Unit 731 immunity negotiations. It was a corporate-state nexus, decades in the making. Meanwhile, in Japan, a dying whistleblower released a memoir, The Unfinished War, smuggled online by activists. The author, a former intelligence officer, confirmed that Unit 731's data had never been contained. It was traded, replicated, and sold to private entities in the 1970s and 80s under secret accords between US and Japanese defense officials. Most explosive was his claim that live samples from Unit 731's bioweapon experiments had been preserved in cryogenic storage and moved offshore before China began excavation in Pingfang. Those samples, he wrote, were the genetic Rosetta Stone for monarchy. Protocols, neurological control agents. Governments denied the memoir's legitimacy, but forensic analysts confirmed the author's identity. Global fear grew, but mainstream media remained quiet. Intimidated or controlled, no one could say for certain. Still, pieces of the truth spread. Activists called for access to the island, for independent inspection, for accountability. They were met with silence. Then, in a televised address, a world leader vaguely referenced unseen enemies, biological threats, and the need for global unity. But his eyes betrayed something else: fear. The kind of fear that knows the past is not dead, it has mutated. And now, it waits offshore, behind steel doors, beyond law, ready for release. Seismic sensors in the Pacific registered a brief but intense tremor originating directly beneath the island identified in the leaked Monarch Protocol files. Officially, it was recorded as a minor tectonic event. Unofficially, it triggered panic across multiple intelligence agencies. Within hours, satellite surveillance detected increased activity on the island, helicopters arriving, ships docking under heavy guard, and the dome-shaped facility emitting what appeared to be dense black smoke. Amateur radio operators in the region picked up scrambled transmissions, one fragment repeating the phrase, "Containment breach, theta chamber compromised." The phrase meant nothing to the public but sent waves through classified communication networks. Analysts speculated that theta chamber referred to the facility's innermost lab, the place where live samples, likely derived from Unit 731's cryogenically preserved pathogens, were being manipulated. Days later, reports surfaced from nearby fishing communities in Micronesia of unexplained illness, fever, confusion, and violent psychosis. Victims spoke of dreams not their own, of hearing voices and feeling compelled to perform bizarre tasks. One man gouged out his own eyes, screaming that they were watching through him. The outbreaks were swiftly contained. Medical teams arrived, allegedly from the World Health Organization, but local witnesses described them as heavily armed and accompanied by personnel speaking American-accented English. No reports were filed. The sick were taken away. Villages quarantined. Then silence. Meanwhile, a whistleblower from a major pharmaceutical conglomerate fled to South America, leaking documents that tied his employer to Monarch Protocol's funding structure. His files revealed a disturbing motive: not warfare, but population modulation, the ability to subtly influence large groups, temper dissent, and shape collective behavior. He alleged that test trials were already underway using aerosolized agents capable of transient neural disruption, short-lived but effective enough to suppress unrest or guide public opinion during moments of crisis. And the foundation for this? The neurological agent N45, developed originally in Unit 731's Frozen Hell, now refined, weaponized, and deployed not on battlefields, but in city streets. The revelation was met with disbelief, but within days the whistleblower was dead, found in a hotel room with signs of poisoning. His files vanished. The world's attention shifted elsewhere. But for those who understood, one fact was clear. Unit 731's legacy had entered its final phase. Not just killing, but control. The war never ended. It simply changed its mask. A former intelligence operative known only by the alias Cairo leaked a classified transcript from a closed-door meeting at the United Nations Security Council. The agenda: unacknowledged biological influence operations. The transcript revealed that multiple nations, Russia, China, and France among them, accused the United States and Japan of jointly developing neuroactive bioweapons derived from historical Unit 731 research. The accusations centered around a series of incidents over the past decade: unexplained mass disorientation during protests, sudden outbreaks of psychotic behavior in tightly controlled populations, and spikes in suicide rates within zones of political unrest. In each case, the symptoms mimicked those of early N45 exposure. The U.S. delegates denied the charges but refused to release requested data or allow independent inspections of any offshore facilities. Japan remained silent. The meeting ended in stalemate, but what followed was unprecedented. China declassified thousands of pages from its own investigations into Unit 731 and Monarch Protocol. Included were testimonies from detained operatives, images of recovered pathogens, and analysis of the neurological impacts of N45 strains. Most damning was a video dated 2015 showing an aerosol canister being deployed in a controlled environment. Subjects exposed to the gas exhibited immediate compliance, loss of personal will, and in some cases memory blackouts. The video ended with a voice stating, "This is Harvest Variant 3, operational readiness confirmed." The world reacted with horror, but governments again denied involvement. The mainstream media remained curiously restrained, offering only brief coverage before refocusing on economic and political headlines. In digital spaces, however, the truth burned like wildfire. Millions viewed the footage. Activists and journalists demanded tribunals. Protesters stormed biotech facilities allegedly tied to Monarch Protocol. The response was swift. Several independent news sites were shut down. Key whistleblowers arrested under charges of espionage. Public discourse was fragmented by disinformation campaigns, discrediting the leaks as fabrications. But among the chaos, a pattern emerged, an invisible hand suppressing, manipulating, erasing. Not just to protect power, but to preserve the knowledge birthed in the cold chambers of Unit 731, knowledge now too valuable to relinquish. The truth had surfaced. The question was, who now owned it, and what would they do next? Because once a weapon is unleashed, it does not vanish. It waits in silence for its next command. At 3:12 a.m. local time, multiple thermal spikes erupted across the island, followed by a massive plume of smoke visible for miles. Seismic stations recorded a blast consistent with a large-scale detonation, intentional, precise, and absolute. Within hours, military ships from undisclosed nations encircled the area. No rescue missions were launched, no survivors reported. The dome-shaped structure was gone, replaced by a scorched crater. Official statements labeled it a volcanic gas eruption. Independent experts called the explanation absurd. But the message was clear. The site had been eliminated, its contents, biological, digital, human, erased. The sudden destruction fueled intense speculation. Had there been a containment breach of N45, a failed trial? Or was it a purge? Evidence incinerated to prevent exposure. Cairo, still active in the shadows, leaked one final document, a terminal command log titled Operation Veilfall. The file showed that, hours before the explosion, a secure data transfer occurred from the island to an unknown server network scattered across 5 continents. The files were heavily encrypted, bearing the same alphanumeric tags as Unit 731's original data archives. The entire knowledge base had been copied. Now it was no longer under one entity's control. It was dispersed, fragmented, and in the wind. The implications were catastrophic. Monarch Protocol was no longer a secret project. It was now digital contraband, potentially in the hands of rogue states, corporations, or even independent actors. Days after the explosion, cyber attacks targeted major biotech firms, defense contractors, and research institutions. Systems were breached. Some companies collapsed overnight, their executives vanishing. The global economy trembled, but the greater fear was intangible. N45 was out. Somewhere in the chaos, the formulas, the samples, the blueprints, they now existed beyond control. Governments raced to secure or destroy them. Black Ops units were deployed under the veil of biosecurity missions. People disappeared, labs burned, witnesses silenced. But the purge could not keep pace with the spread. The knowledge born from Unit 731 had broken its chains. It was no longer a relic of war. It had become a virus of its own, infecting systems, ideologies, and ambitions. And in the shadows, unseen players waited to harness it, not to end life, but to shape it, to decide who remembers, who obeys, and who forgets. By 1947, Unit 731 should have been a name forever damned by history, But instead of facing trials and retribution, its legacy took a sinister turn. After Japan's surrender, American intelligence operatives, particularly from the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, and its successor, the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, began quiet negotiations with the architects of Unit 731. The goal was cold, calculated: obtain the data, no matter the cost, before it fell into Soviet hands. U.S. occupation forces in Japan, led by General Douglas MacArthur, authorized full immunity for Shiro Ishii and his top officials in exchange for the complete transfer of Unit 731's research, biological warfare data, freezing experiments, and live human vivisection results. This information, soaked in blood and horror, was labeled national security material and flown to military bases in the United States, where it was hidden under classified wartime intelligence protocols. Officially, the United States condemned human experimentation. Secretly, it absorbed the findings, integrating them into early Cold War bioweapons programs. In Fort Detrick, Maryland, the heart of America's biological warfare research, scientists pored over the documents, shocked but enthralled by the precision of Ishii's work. Some of the most grotesque procedures, frostbite exposure, plague infection, chemical dissections, were reviewed and recreated in controlled environments. Victims now included prisoners, mentally ill patients, and disenfranchised minorities, under a new veil: national defense experiments. These projects operated under codenames like Operation Whitecoat and Project 112, their roots unmistakably tangled with Unit 731's ghost. Meanwhile, Shiro Ishii lived in luxury, untouched by justice. By the 1950s, he had reportedly become a consultant for biological warfare defense, shielded from press and internationalized inquiry. His subordinates took up government and academic posts in Japan, many becoming prominent figures in medicine and politics. The War Crimes Tribunal in Tokyo never called them to account. The public was told nothing. The official narrative remained: Unit 731 was a Japanese-only atrocity, destroyed, forgotten. But deep in U.S. military vaults, steel cabinets labeled 731JP held thousands of pages of human suffering, a dark library of death fueling the next generation of covert science. The silence was no accident. It was policy, and the truth, buried under decades of lies, had only begun to rot. By the mid-1950s, the stain of Unit 731 had not faded. It had spread, woven into the fabric of Cold War paranoia and covert operations. As the United States deepened its biological warfare research, Fort Detrick became a hub not only for science but for ethical oblivion. Here, American scientists, now equipped with Unit 731's data, developed aerosolized anthrax, weaponized tularemia, and botulinum toxins mirroring the Japanese unit's infamous death balloons experiments. In remote areas, field tests were conducted on unwitting soldiers, civilian populations, and prisoners. One such program, Operation Sea Spray, released Serratia marquescens into the air over San Francisco in 1950, infecting thousands, all without consent or warning. These tests, justified as harmless, echoed Unit 731's dehumanizing logic: data over dignity. At the same time, the CIA launched Project MK-Ultra, a mind control program that involved LSD testing, sleep deprivation, and psychological torture. While not biological warfare in the traditional sense, MK-Ultra's architects reviewed Unit 731's psychological experiments, specifically those involving extreme trauma, sensory isolation, and behavioral breakdown. Declassified documents later revealed that Japanese data was directly referenced in planning phases, especially in experiments meant to erase and rewrite identity. Some of the same doctors granted immunity by MacArthur's orders were quietly consulted, their wartime expertise in breaking human minds now repurposed for counterintelligence. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union, having captured several Unit 731 personnel during their 1945 invasion of Manchuria, ran parallel experiments in Khabarovsk. Transcripts from the 1949 Khabarovsk trials, long suppressed in the West, revealed that Soviet scientists had also extracted data and began their own bioweapons development, igniting a biological arms race, fueled by human suffering. As tensions between East and West escalated, both superpowers covered their tracks. Official records of Unit 731's existence were altered, and Western textbooks omitted any mention of the atrocities. Journalists and researchers seeking the truth were blocked, discredited, or in some cases, disappeared. In Japan, survivors of Unit 731's cruelty were silenced, their testimony rejected, their trauma denied. Lawsuits brought by Chinese victims were thrown out. No reparations, no trials, no justice. And Shiro Ishii? He vanished from public life, rumored to have died in the late 1950s, but no grave was ever found, no obituary published. He had become a ghost protected by empire, his crimes entombed beneath official secrets. The truth wasn't lost. It was hidden in plain sight, buried beneath layers of classified files and political deals where no light dared shine. By the 1960s, the legacy of Unit 731 had become a shadow doctrine, a forbidden knowledge base that governments used but never acknowledged. As the United States ramped up its presence in Vietnam, whispers emerged from military insiders about unconventional warfare, including chemical and biological agents. Under the veil of the Vietnam War, operations like Project Ranch Hand deployed Agent Orange, a defoliant laced with dioxin, causing massive civilian suffering, birth defects, and long-term contamination. Though developed independently, military scientists referenced Unit 731's field data on chemical dispersal and effects on human populations. In secret briefings, the phrase 731 grade results appeared, denoting data obtained through direct human experimentation, a dark nod to the past. Meanwhile, inside Fort Detrick and other black sites, biological warfare programs evolved. The infamous Operation Whitecoat, running from 1954 to 1973, tested diseases like Q fever, tularemia, and plague on conscientious objectors, many of whom were misled about the true nature of the experiments. Unit 731's plague data, specifically from Manchurian field tests on Chinese villages, was consulted and digitized, then used to model urban outbreak scenarios. In Japan, silence remained absolute. Unit 731's former members occupied elite positions in hospitals, universities, and government. One key figure, Dr. Masaji Kitano, became president of Green Cross, a major pharmaceutical company, his past erased from official records. The same company would later be implicated in the tainted blood scandal of the 1980s, distributing HIV-infected blood products. A cruel irony for a man once involved in blood-based vivisection experiments. In China, the sites of Unit 731's atrocities were bulldozed or abandoned, while survivors faced political persecution, especially during the Cultural Revolution. Ear voices were lost in the chaos, but in 1966 a Chinese historian uncovered skeletal remains near the Pingfang complex, bones charred, some with surgical incisions, others belonging to children. His report was buried by the state, labeled counter-revolutionary, and he was imprisoned. The world moved on, forgetting by design. But within intelligence agencies, the 731 papers remained active files used in training, planning, and threat assessment. The knowledge was too valuable, the origins too damning. Justice for the victims was never a priority, utility was. The West had buried the crimes under layers of national security, but every time a new weapon was designed, a new virus cultivated, or a new experiment justified, the ghost of Unit 731 stood silently in the room, unseen, unpunished, but always present. As the 1970s unfolded, the macabre influence of Unit 731 surfaced again, not through official acknowledgement, but through leaks, whispers, and half-buried truths. In 1976, journalist John Powell published a daring article in the Bulletin of Concerned Asian Scholars, accusing the U.S. government of covering up war crimes and making secret deals with Shiro Ishii and his subordinates. Powell had unearthed military memos indicating direct immunity exchanges and traced how Ishii's data had been used to accelerate U.S. biological warfare programs. The response was swift. Powell was sued for libel, hounded by federal agencies, and his career dismantled. The truth, it seemed, was off-limits, protected by layers of denial and fear. Around the same time, the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal records resurfaced, revealing that prosecution teams had submitted requests to indict Unit 731 members, requests that were silenced by General MacArthur's office. Declassified documents showed that the State Department and Pentagon feared a public trial would expose not only Japan's atrocities, but America's complicity in shielding them. In South Korea, documents surfaced indicating that during the Korean War, biological weapons were tested on the battlefield, and while the U.S. government denied involvement, North Korea and China accused the U.S. of using techniques rooted in Unit 731's research, including plague bombs and contaminated insects. American pilots captured during the war made public confessions, detailing their missions involving biological agents. These were dismissed as communist propaganda, but in 1998, secret Chinese archives revealed that American biowarfare planning in Korea mirrored Unit 731's tactical patterns. As the Cold War wore on, fear of biowarfare led to the 1972 Biological Weapons Convention, BWC. Publicly, the U.S. signed on, vowing to destroy all offensive bioweapons. Privately, testing continued under the banner of defensive research. The shadow of 731 still loomed, undeclared but ever-present. Inside Fort Detrick, Project Bacchus sought to build a hidden biowarfare capability, and again the 731 archives were consulted. Scientists, some trained by former Unit 731 advisors, tested dispersal methods eerily similar to Ishii's ceramic bomb plagues. Despite mounting pressure, Japan remained silent. No government apology was issued, no memorials built. Survivors in China's Harbin region, where Unit 731 once operated, began forming underground networks to collect testimonies and relics. Their findings, often hidden at great personal risk, painted a chilling picture. Wells poisoned with cholera, families wiped out by plague bombs, and villages erased from maps. The world wasn't ready to confront these truths, and those in power had no interest in exhuming the skeletons they had so carefully buried beneath decades of secrecy, lies, and denial. By the 1980s, the silence surrounding Unit 731 began to crack, but not by the hands of governments. It was the result of survivors, independent scholars, and a new generation of relentless investigators. In Harbin, China, local farmers discovered mass graves near the ruins of the Pingfang complex. Bones fused together, many with knife marks, fractures, and drilled skulls, clear signs of vivisection and medical torture. These remains couldn't be ignored. Chinese authorities, under growing public pressure, launched a limited excavation. The result? Over 100 skeletons, some of them children, were unearthed from shallow pits. Nearby, glass vials with Japanese markings, rusted surgical tools, and remnants of biological storage containers were found. The Chinese government officially accused Japan of war crimes, submitting evidence to international human rights organizations, but Japan's response was stone silence. In Tokyo, protests erupted as activists and historians demanded government accountability and public acknowledgement of Unit 731's atrocities. The Japanese Ministry of Health denied involvement. Former Unit 731 officials, now elderly and holding prestigious medical positions, either refused to speak or flatly denied the unit's existence. Behind closed doors, American diplomats urged Japan to maintain silence, fearing that exposure of the Unit 731 immunity deal would spark global outrage and legal consequences. Meanwhile, in the United States, declassified documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, requests revealed damning details. Shiro Ishii had met with U.S. Army scientists in Tokyo in 1947, providing detailed reports on plague bombs, frostbite endurance, and forced infections. His payment? Complete immunity and a cash stipend. These revelations were published in academic journals, yet mainstream media outlets offered minimal coverage. The CIA, when questioned about its role in protecting war criminals, offered no comment. Around this time, the International Red Cross acknowledged the inadequacy of post-war tribunals, citing Unit 731 as a monumental failure of justice. But no action followed. Survivors from China, Korea, and the Philippines filed lawsuits in Japanese courts, seeking acknowledgement and reparations. Every case was dismissed, with judges citing lack of evidence despite overwhelming proof. Victims of live experiments, many disfigured for life, died in poverty, unheard and forgotten. Meanwhile, Japan's educational system omitted Unit 731 from history books, erasing it from national memory. The world looked away, its conscience shielded by Cold War politics and economic alliances. Justice had no place in the balance of power. The truth had become a liability, and Unit 731 remained a phantom, present, undeniable, yet officially non-existent. The 1990s brought a wave of reckoning, but still, no justice. As the Cold War ended, declassified archives flooded into the hands of independent researchers, and among them were the 731 files, a trove of documents once sealed by the US Army and CIA. These files, stamped top secret, contained detailed reports from Shiro Ishii himself, written in clinical, detached language, descriptions of vivisections on live prisoners, freezing experiments on limbs, and plague bomb deployments on Chinese villages. One memo from 1947 bore a chilling sentence: "The value of this data surpasses its moral cost." This sentence alone ignited international outrage, especially in China and South Korea, where survivors of Unit 731's biological warfare attacks still lived in obscurity, their trauma unacknowledged. In 1993, Japan's Prime Minister Morihiro Hosokawa publicly admitted that Japan had committed wartime aggression, but he stopped short of mentioning Unit 731 or issuing an apology to its victims. In Harbin, China built a museum on the ruins of the Pingfang complex, displaying rusted surgical tables, vivisection diagrams, and photographs of victims. The evidence was undeniable, but Japan's government continued to deny official responsibility, calling the museum's contents exaggerated. Inside Japan, whistleblowers began to emerge. Ken Yuasa, a former army doctor, confessed to participating in live experiments under Unit 731's umbrella. His testimony, delivered to a small audience of students, sparked a national controversy, but officials dismissed him as a rogue element, refusing to link his actions to government policy. Meanwhile, in the United States, congressional hearings on biological warfare programs briefly touched on Unit 731's data usage, but witnesses either pleaded ignorance or invoked classification laws. No officials were held accountable. Documents showed that pharmaceutical companies, including some with ties to former Unit 731 doctors, had utilized research findings in developing vaccines and surgical techniques, now profitable commodities. Survivors of Unit 731's atrocities filed another class action lawsuit in Japanese courts, joined by descendants of victims. The case was dismissed once again, the court citing no legal basis for compensation, as Japan had signed no treaties acknowledging these crimes. The victims, many now elderly and dying, were erased again, first by war, now by law. In 1997, a mass grave near Pingfang yielded over 400 bodies, many of them children, with signs of surgical mutilation. Even then, Japan refused to accept responsibility. The bones were labeled an unfortunate relic of war, nothing more. Truth had surfaced, but accountability remained buried, protected by the machinery of state, the fear of reparation, and the dark convenience of forgetting. In the early 2000s, the truth of Unit 731 finally reached the world stage, but still, justice was denied. In 2002, under immense international pressure, Japanese historian Yoshio Shinozuka, a former Unit 731 medic, testified in Chinese courts, detailing his role in human experimentation. He described vivisections without anesthesia, plague bomb tests on civilians, and deliberate infection of prisoners with cholera, anthrax, and syphilis. His words were chilling, his voice steady. Yet in Japan, his testimony was branded treasonous, and government officials refused comment. That same year in Tokyo District Court, 180 survivors and families of Unit 731 victims filed a landmark lawsuit, demanding official apology and compensation. They submitted photographs, medical records, and eyewitness testimony, but the court ruled against them, declaring that individuals had no right to claim compensation for wartime actions under international law. The decision sparked global outrage. In China, protests erupted outside the Japanese embassy. In South Korea, activists demanded international trials, but Japan's stance remained unchanged. Unit 731, if it existed at all, was a military matter long closed. Behind the scenes, U.S. diplomatic cables later exposed by WikiLeaks revealed that American officials discouraged Japan from issuing apologies, fearing that acknowledgement would revive scrutiny of U.S. war crimes cover-ups, particularly the immunity deal with Ishii. Meanwhile, the 731 legacy continued to surface in unexpected places. In 2003, investigative journalists revealed that the University of Tokyo's medical school, once linked to Unit 731 doctors, had stored human remains believed to be from vivisection victims. These remains had been kept in secret cabinets since 1945. Following public outcry, the university quietly cremated the bones, issuing a brief apology without investigation. Survivors called it a second death. International scholars and human rights advocates pressed the United Nations to declare Unit 731's actions crimes against humanity, comparable to the Holocaust. But political alliances, particularly Japan's role in US-led global security, ensured that no tribunal was convened. In 2005, on the 60th anniversary of WWII's end, Japan's Prime Minister Koizumi offered general condolences to all victims of war, but omitted any reference to Unit 731. The message was clear: official amnesia remained policy. In the shadows of modern laboratories and government buildings, the data lived on, the results of torture, the numbers and notes from Ishii's notebooks stored in secure military archives, never disavowed, never destroyed. In this silence, Unit 731 achieved its final victory, not just in the suffering it caused, but in the world's refusal to remember it fully and to condemn those who profited from its horrors. In 2010, a crack appeared in the long-standing wall of silence. For the first time, the Japanese government was forced to confront its past, not by foreign pressure, but by unearthed proof impossible to ignore. In Harbin, construction crews accidentally discovered sealed chambers beneath the former Pingfang complex. Inside were steel canisters, stamped with Japanese military markings containing preserved organs, fetuses, and severed limbs, still intact due to sub-zero temperatures. Forensic analysis confirmed that many specimens bore surgical incisions made while the subject was alive. The images, leaked to the international press, sparked immediate fury. Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and Chinese authorities called for an international tribunal. Japan responded with cautious acknowledgement, admitting for the first time that medical experiments may have been conducted during wartime, but stopped short of admitting state responsibility or offering reparations. In Tokyo, thousands marched in protest, demanding that Unit 731's crimes be recognized in school curricula, but education officials blocked the proposal, citing its sensitive nature. Yet cracks widened. A former Japanese nurse, Toyoko Fuji, came forward with a confession. In 1945, she was ordered to assist in the incineration of evidence at Pingfang, including live subjects. Her testimony, recorded by foreign journalists, described patients strapped to gurneys, doused in kerosene, and burned alive to erase traces of experimentation. Her voice shook, but she insisted, "We were told they weren't human, just logs." Meanwhile, in the United States, declassification of Pentagon files revealed a chilling truth. During the Korean War, American biological warfare units had operational manuals derived from Unit 731's field reports. These included infection dispersal tactics and disease resistance protocols, lifted directly from Ishii's wartime findings. The U.S. government refused comment. In South Korea, survivors of suspected plague attacks during the war filed suit against both the U.S. and Japan, citing Unit 731's involvement. The case was dismissed, citing lack of jurisdiction, but attention surged. Documentaries, books, and survivor memoirs flooded the public sphere. Yet despite global attention, no criminal indictment indictments were ever filed. Ishii's grave remained unmarked, his descendants wealthy and protected, his name excluded from Japan's list of war criminals. The Harbin Museum, now expanded, drew millions of visitors, but in Japan, no monument to Unit 731's victims was ever erected. Justice remained a distant echo, buried beneath bureaucracy, nationalism, and political convenience. The evidence was undeniable, but the will to prosecute the truth, like so many lives in Pingfang, had been silenced by fire and time. By 2015, the ghosts of Unit 731 continued to stir, not in the courts or parliaments of nations, but in forgotten archives, unmarked graves, and the withered memories of survivors clinging to life. In Changchun, China, elderly villagers recounted a night in 1941 when black planes dropped ceramic bombs filled with fleas. Days later, their town was gripped by bubonic plague, livestock died in droves, and children perished in agony. These stories, dismissed for decades as folklore, gained credibility when a local excavation uncovered shattered bomb casings embedded in the earth, marked with the emblem of the Imperial Japanese Army. Scientists confirmed the metal-matched Unit 731's plague delivery devices, as preserved in the Harbin Museum. Meanwhile, international pressure mounted on Japan. United Nations rapporteurs urged Japan to fully declassify all wartime records and issue formal recognition of Unit 731's crimes. The Japanese government under Prime Minister Shinzo Abe declined. In a public statement, officials claimed there was insufficient evidence to alter Japan's wartime narrative. Instead, nationalist factions intensified efforts to whitewash history. Textbooks erased references to Unit 731, and revisionist scholars claimed the Harbin Museum was propaganda. But truth is persistent. In 2016, newly declassified Soviet files revealed that during the Khabarovsk trials in 1949, captured Unit 731 personnel confessed in detail to their crimes, not under duress, but with technical precision, discussing freezing studies, syphilis experiments, and live autopsies. These transcripts had been dismissed by the West during the Cold War as communist fabrications, but now stood as irrefutable evidence. The files further confirmed that Soviet bioweapons research had absorbed Unit 731's data, just as the US had done. Both superpowers had profited from human suffering, erasing any moral high ground. In Japan, public discourse remained deeply divided. A new wave of young activists armed with digital tools began mapping former Unit 731 facilities, tracking the careers of war criminals, and exposing how many had become wealthy industrialists, medical pioneers, and politicians. Their work was met with threats, intimidation, and in some cases, mysterious disappearances. The shadow of Unit 731 was not just historical, it was intergenerational, its silence enforced by power, its truth too dangerous for the living. The question remained, how could a crime so vast, so barbaric, remain unpunished? The answer lay not in what was forgotten, but in what the world chose, time and again, not to remember. In the damp basements of old military hospitals in Tokyo, boxes labeled Medical Archives 731 sat collecting dust. They were never meant to be found, but when a group of civilian researchers gained unauthorized access during a building renovation, they uncovered photographs, surgical diagrams, and detailed ledgers listing thousands of victims, with names, ages, and the precise method of death. Some ledgers recorded injection trials of plague, others documented limb amputations without anesthesia, and a chilling set of files described induced heart attacks in children for cardiac study. The discovery was immediately suppressed, the files confiscated, and the researchers interrogated by government officials. Their findings were never publicly released, and all media coverage vanished within days. One researcher, under anonymity, smuggled copies of several documents to an independent journalist who attempted to publish them abroad. The files circulated briefly in underground forums, showing the raw, cold arithmetic of mass torture. One line stood out, written in the hand of a former Unit 731 officer. Test subject 479, male, age 8. Exposure to extreme cold. Time to death, 47 minutes. There was no remorse in these pages, only calculation. Around the same time, an aging former nurse dying of cancer confessed on her deathbed to assisting in the disposal of bodies. She described industrial-sized furnaces used daily and how she was instructed to clean the tools after each vivisection. "They told us these people were less than animals," she said, "but they screamed like anyone else." Her confession was recorded, but the tape was lost shortly after her death. In China, further excavation at the Pingfang complex revealed metal tags, similar to those used in Japanese medical facilities, stamped with serial numbers matching those in the newly uncovered ledgers. The connection was indisputable, a chain linking the ruins, the records, and the silent mass graves. Still, no prosecutions came. No names were removed from plaques in hospitals or universities. The war criminals had become national heroes, their pasts erased or glorified. The victims, nameless in life, remained nameless in death, and the world, having glanced at the truth, once again turned away. The files vanished. The evidence was locked away, but the bones remained, and beneath every stone laid in silence, the ground whispered of the crimes buried deep, waiting for someone to hear. In a sealed vault beneath a Tokyo ministry building, a ledger marked Ishii Confidential remained hidden for decades. Its contents were not only technical notes from experiments, but records of transactions, dates, and foreign contacts. Among them, coded entries revealed meetings between Shiro Ishii and American military officials, where biological samples, organs, blood, preserved pathogens were handed over in exchange for gold and immunity. One chilling line, translated from Japanese, read, "Sample batch 32, plague lungs, transferred to American transport, Yokohama port." The ledger named no victims, only specimens and test results. This document was quietly discovered by a junior clerk during an internal audit, but was immediately seized by intelligence officers. Its existence was denied, yet the clerk's whistleblower account leaked to foreign press. He disappeared shortly after, never to be seen again. In China, a survivor's private journal surfaced, written in crude characters, hidden beneath floorboards in a ruined village house. The author, a teenage boy at the time of capture, described being taken to a cold room by Japanese soldiers, watching dozens of villagers die from white smoke experiments, and hearing saws and screams from nearby rooms. His final entry read, "They said I would be next. I write to remember my family's names. If I forget, they will be gone forever." The journal ended abruptly. Archaeologists later confirmed that the village had been wiped off wartime maps, its remains buried under modern developments. No official record of its existence remained. Meanwhile, in a locked storeroom of a major Japanese medical university, glass jars labeled with faded Japanese script were found during renovations. Inside were preserved human brains, many from children, tagged with dates corresponding to the war years. The university denied any link to WWII 731, calling it historical material of unknown origin. The jars were quietly removed and the room sealed forever. Across the world, human rights groups demanded independent investigations, but were blocked by national security clauses, state secrets laws, and diplomatic threats. The pattern repeated. Evidence surfaced, was buried, and those who sought the truth were silenced. The story of Unit 731 remained a crime without punishment, a history written in the language of power and fear, where the dead could not speak and the living refused to listen. Beneath the silence, the truth endured, rotting but never forgotten, waiting to rise again. In a remote archive facility in Maryland, a researcher cataloging declassified documents stumbled upon a folder labeled 731JP, Tactical Applications. Inside were memos exchanged between American military officials and scientists discussing the integration of Unit 731's data into cold climate warfare protocols. The memos detailed frostbite endurance charts, the survivability of organs under extreme cold, and methods for rapid tissue freezing. Each page referenced source, Ishii experiments, Pingfang. What shocked the researcher most was not just the content but the language. Clinical, detached, devoid of morality. One note read, "Subject viability ceased after 47 minutes exposure. recommend adoption of similar methodologies in Arctic training simulations. No mention of who the subject was, just a number, just data. The researchers' report was buried, the folder returned to restricted access. No further inquiry was allowed. Meanwhile, in the basement of a Japanese shrine near Kyoto, a local historian discovered a sealed wooden box. Inside were photographs, some marked with the symbol of the Kempeitai, Japan's secret police. The images showed naked prisoners chained to tables, limbs dissected and faces contorted in agony. On the back of each photo, names were written, not of the victims but of the doctors, with ranks and units identified. One recurring name, Masaji Kitano, Unit 731, second in command, later a prominent medical figure in Japan. These photographs, brought to light for a brief moment, were swiftly confiscated by officials who declared them forgeries. The historian vanished from public life shortly after. Across the Sea of Japan in Seoul, South Korea, victims' families continued to seek acknowledgement. Their relatives had disappeared during the Japanese occupation, last seen boarding trains to unknown destinations. Decades later, investigators traced rail records to transport lines leading directly to Manchuria to the gates of Pingfang. No return journeys were recorded. The names of those taken matched partially with a list recovered from burned papers found near the ruins of Unit 731's facility. A partial list, burned, incomplete, but each name echoed a life erased, a memory denied. Still, no acknowledgement came, no apology. In official circles, the story remained taboo, untouchable. Even as bones were unearthed, documents leaked and witnesses testified, the system built to forget remained intact. The dead, it seemed, had no advocates in power. Their suffering lived only in fragments, scattered across forbidden archives and forgotten graves. The silence, however, was not empty. It was screaming just beneath the surface. In the hills outside Harbin, villagers long whispered about a concrete pit hidden deep in the forest where no birds sang and no grass grew. Local children called it the Devil's Hole, forbidden by their elders. One day, a team of amateur historians traced old military maps and found it, a sealed shaft covered by rusted iron and thick brush. With cautious effort, they uncovered the entrance and descended. Below, they found a chamber lined with steel, walls stained dark, and remnants of restraints bolted into the floor. Scattered nearby were glass fragments, some labeled with faded Japanese characters, Test Fluid A, Frost Reaction B, and Specimen 4A2. In the corner, they found a crate of bones, small, delicate, belonging to children. Forensic analysis later confirmed human remains with evidence of incisions and exposure to extreme cold. The site had been a substation of Unit 731 used for remote testing away from the main complex. The discovery was briefly reported by an independent news outlet, but within days the site was cordoned off, declared unsafe, and bulldozed under the guise of development. No official statement was made. In Tokyo, a former archivist, aged and frail, confessed that she had destroyed dozens of boxes of Unit 731 records in the final days of the war. Ordered by her superiors, she recalled burning photographs, test ledgers, and names of foreign collaborators, including several German and American observers who had visited Pingfang. Her confession, recorded privately, detailed how film reels of live experiments were also destroyed. Footage showing the effects of weaponized pathogens on prisoners, documented with clinical precision. Her hands shook as she described the images that haunted her. She died shortly after giving the testimony. The recordings vanished. In the corridors of power, names of war criminals remained absent from public disque. Race: Masaji Kitano, Shunji Sato, Takeshi Takeshita, all Unit 731 veterans, had become respected physicians, honored in their fields. Plaques commemorating their contributions still hung in hospitals and universities. No mention of where their knowledge came from. Victims reduced to data remained unacknowledged. The machinery that used their suffering had moved on, evolved, profitable and protected. Every time someone tried to shine light on the truth, it was extinguished, not with violence but with paperwork, silence and time. And beneath the silence, the ground remained heavy with the weight of unburied truth, a truth too disturbing for those who had had benefited from forgetting. Deep within the archives of a prominent Japanese pharmaceutical company, a logbook surfaced, listing early formulations of drugs developed in the post-war era. Tucked among mundane entries was a notation in red ink, sourced from 731 protocols, effectiveness proven on live tissue. The drug in question had become a widely used antibiotic, credited to a doctor once stationed in Manchuria, now celebrated as a pioneer in medical science. When pressed, company officials claimed the logbook was a forgery, a fabrication meant to tarnish reputations, but the handwriting matched archived military documents, and the dates aligned with known Unit 731 experiments on infection control. Independent investigators were denied access. The logbook vanished from the company's records. In an abandoned farmhouse near the former Pingfang site, locals discovered glass vials, sealed with wax and marked with kanji characters for plague and cholera. Some were broken, the soil beneath scorched. Nearby, they unearthed charred bone fragments and fragments of surgical equipment, twisted and blackened. Forensic teams determined the area had once been a makeshift incineration site, hastily destroyed as Soviet forces approached in 1945. Among the debris was a metal tag stamped with a serial number identical to one found in Unit 731's destroyed registry, smuggled decades earlier by a whistleblower. The evidence was irrefutable, yet the discovery was swiftly declared a public safety hazard, the area fenced off and access denied. In official statements, it was called a former industrial site, unconnected to military activity. A lie carefully worded, expertly executed. In private collections and underground forums, smuggled photographs circulated, images of experiment rooms, medical tools, and rows of emaciated prisoners, blindfolded, awaiting procedures. Each image bore the mark of Unit 731's PMP. Photographic Division, a unit tasked with documenting every test for scientific accuracy. These photographs had been recovered from black market dealers, sold as relics, and carried the weight of silent screams. Every face in those images had been erased from history, every name lost. Only their suffering remained, etched in grayscale, ignored by governments that had profited from the knowledge extracted through their agony. Justice had no place here, only denial, exploitation, and the comfort of forgetting. The world had moved on, but the crimes of Unit 731 were not in the past. They lingered in labs, textbooks, and untouched graves, a grotesque legacy sustained by power and fear. In a remote Chinese village where few dared tread, elders spoke of the night trains, unmarked, silent, and arriving under darkness. From them, soldiers unloaded crates, not of weapons or supplies, but humans, shackled and blindfolded. They were taken to hidden compounds, structures of steel and stone, now overgrown and crumbling. When the compounds were finally explored by local historians, concrete chambers were found beneath the earth, rooms with drainage holes, restraint racks, and walls covered in deep gouges, as if made by fingernails in final desperation. The air was heavy, stale with rot and rust. Scattered among the debris were ceramic bomb fragments, their curved edges matching designs used by Unit 731 to disperse plague-infected fleas. In a sealed compartment, a metal trunk was uncovered, inside of which lay notebooks wrapped in oilskin. The pages were fragile but legible. Written in precise Japanese, the notes described infection cycles, mortality rates, and exposure times, each entry tagged to a log, the word Unit 731 used to strip victims of humanity. One passage read, Log 62, child, female, subject failed to respond to frostbite at -20 degrees, extremities amputated without anesthesia. These notebooks were smuggled out by researchers before officials could intervene. Their publication was blocked, labeled fabricated history, yet forensic experts verified the ink, paper, and handwriting, all authentic. Across the sea, in governmental halls, silence remained policy. Those who had built empires of medicine and wealth atop these crimes remained untouched, their legacies intact. The victims' names were never spoken. No memorial marked the compound. No government acknowledged its horror. Even as bones surfaced in nearby fields and artifacts emerged from the soil, the past was continually buried under construction projects, sealed by law, and drowned in deni. Atrocities. The machinery that erased these lives operated not only in war but in peace. In the form of bureaucracy, apathy and power, the truth was known, but known only to those willing to see. Most chose not to. And so the chambers remained silent, their secrets carved into stone and bone, waiting for voices that could never speak again. In a sealed room beneath a major hospital in Tokyo, long-forgotten storage containers held the remnants of cold ambition cloaked in white coats. Among the dust-covered boxes was one labeled Pathological Studies, Continental Operations. Inside were dozens of glass slides, each containing tissue samples, liver, lung, brain, carefully preserved, meticulously labeled with serial numbers, but no names. Accompanying these was a handwritten log recording dates, experiment types, and outcomes. One entry read, Subject 3 Fumfine, male, exposure to aerosolized anthrax, death in 43 hours, lung tissue extracted post-mortem. The handwriting matched that of a known Unit 731 surgeon, now long dead, whose name still adorned research papers and medical awards. Hospital officials, when confronted, claimed the materials were donated for scientific research, and any connection to war crimes was pure speculation. The samples were quietly removed, the room sealed again. The logbook vanished. Far from the city, a river running through what was once a testing zone for biological weapons turned up strange findings. Locals fishing near the banks pulled up bones fused together with clear marks of surgical saws and breaks, the kind seen not in burial rites but in dissections performed on the living. The bones were sent for analysis. Results confirmed they were human, likely from multiple individuals, and dating to the time of Unit 731's operations. There were no graves nearby, no monuments, just the river flowing past the forgotten. In a secret collection in Europe, a private letter from a U.S. intelligence officer surfaced, describing visits to Japanese biowarfare sites post-surrender. The officer wrote, "The results achieved here cannot be replicated ethically. That is both the horror and the value. Our scientists agree, this is knowledge paid for in blood." That knowledge had been absorbed, institutionalized, and transformed into prestige, patents, and global influence. The victims were reduced to numbers in margins, their suffering converted into military advantage and medical profit. Efforts to exhume the full truth faced constant obstruction, blocked access, missing files, sudden disappearances. The past was not merely hidden, it was actively protected, and so in laboratories, universities and government buildings the legacy of Unit 731 endured, not as a relic, but as a foundation, laid in secret, maintained in silence. The crimes, never punished, had become a dark inheritance, passed on not through confession, but through omission. The truth existed, not lost, not forgotten, but buried where few dared to dig. On the outskirts of an abandoned airfield once used by the Imperial Japanese Army, a concrete bunker was uncovered by construction crews leveling ground for a new industrial site. Hidden beneath layers of earth and time, the bunker's steel doors creaked open to reveal rows of sealed containers, each marked with a faded insignia, Unit 731. Inside, alongside rotted uniforms and rusted tools, lay a collection of film canisters miraculously preserved. When played, the reels revealed grainy black and white footage, silent but devastating. Scenes of human subjects restrained on operating tables, their faces visible, their eyes open, unblinking. One reel showed frostbite experiments, fingers plunged into ice water, flesh turning black as doctors recorded notes. Another depicted plague bomb dispersals over rural areas, filmed from low-flying aircraft, followed by scenes of villagers convulsing in agony. Each film bore a title card, 731 Documentation, for internal research only. The footage was undeniable, yet when attempts were made to authenticate and release it, authorities intervened, seizing the reels under national security orders. The discovery was declared classified, never intended for public view. Workers who uncovered the site were silenced by legal agreements, and the bunker was demolished within days. In a separate location, a hidden ledger was discovered within the walls of an old medical building containing names of foreign advisors and observers who had visited Unit 731's facilities. Among them were individuals from Germany, Italy, and even neutral nations, all of whom had witnessed or received data from the experiments. Some names matched renowned post-war scientists and diplomats, now memorialized in academic halls and international institutions. The implications were devastating, global complicity far beyond Japan's borders. Yet, once again, the WWII disappeared into private archives, and the official narrative remained untouched. Across regions where Unit 731 once operated, the Earth still yields evidence: bones, tools, fragments of ceramic bombs. Farmers, while tilling fields, find glass vials, remnants of pathogens long dormant, and human remains buried shallow, without markers. They report these finds, but officials arrive swiftly, remove the artifacts, and the silence resumes. Justice for the victims remains elusive, drowned beneath bureaucracy and indifference. The legacy of Unit 731 persists, not just in hidden rooms and forgotten bunkers, but in the collective refusal to confront the truth. A legacy of scientific horror, of state-sponsored erasure, and of a world more comfortable with forgetting than facing what was done in the name of progress. In a darkened room of an old military museum, long closed to the public, a sealed crate was found during an inventory meant to clear space for renovation. Inside were personal journals written in tight, hurried script, belonging to a junior medical officer assigned to Unit 731. The pages were stained, brittle, yet the ink still legible. These were not cold reports or clinical notes. They were accounts of doubt, fear, and complicity. One entry read, "I held the child down today. She screamed for her mother. They told me it was for the Empire, that she was just a log, but I can still hear her." The officer's entries grew more fragmented, describing the stench of decay, the endless shipments of prisoners, and the ritualized nature of death in Pingfang. He spoke of orders from above, of quotas for daily experiments, and of burning the bodies before sunrise to erase all trace. His final entry simply read, "I have become a ghost. The war is ending. If I survive, I carry this forever." He did not survive. His name does not appear in any official record. The journals were reviewed briefly by curators, then sealed away, deemed too sensitive for display. In another part of the country, beneath the foundations of a former barracks, a mass grave was unearthed. Hundreds of skulls and bones, many with signs of saw cuts, drilled holes, and severed joints. Forensic analysis confirmed pre-mortem incisions, indicating victims had been vivisected alive. A rusted surgical tray nearby bore the initials of a known Unit 731 doctor, once hailed as a pioneer of modern surgery. The site was quickly classified, excavations halted, and the remains reburied in secrecy without ceremony. The truth once again was covered with earth and silence. In the highest levels of political power there was no interest in reopening wounds, no appetite for truth commissions or war crime tribunals. Too many reputations, alliances, and economic legacies were tied to the knowledge extracted through torture. The world, comfortable in its forgetting, had no room for the dead. But beneath every buried bone, every sealed file, and every whispered confession, the truth waited. Undeniable, festering, and eternal. It was not lost. It had been hidden on purpose, and the cost of remembering had been judged too high. The victims had no voice, but their remains spoke through every silent scream, a testimony etched into history's darkest corner. In the ruins of Pingfang, amid crumbling walls and rusted gates, the wind carries a silence too heavy to ignore. The stones are cracked, the ground uneven, but beneath every inch lies the weight of unspeakable cruelty. No monument stands here for the thousands who were dissected alive, infected, frozen, and burned to ash in the name of progress. Only ruins and bones, unclaimed, uncounted, and unwanted. Their names were erased, their lives reduced to numbers in logbooks, their deaths dismissed as military necessity. The doctors who ordered their suffering walked free, their legacies untarnished, their knowledge used to build empires of medicine and war, and the nations that could have brought justice chose instead to profit from silence. Unit 731's crimes were not hidden by ignorance but by deliberate design. Evidence was destroyed, witnesses silenced, truths classified. In exchange for immunity, the world received a gift of blood-soaked knowledge, medical data no ethical scientist would ever seek to replicate. That data now resides in textbooks, patents and protocols, the human cost forgotten. Generations have passed, yet the shadow remains. Victims never received justice. Their stories remain buried beneath layers of denial, nationalism and geopolitical convenience. To speak their names is to disturb a silence carefully cultivated. In every sealed archive, every unmarked grave, every erased photograph, the truth waits, unchanged, immovable. It is not history. It is a crime still bleeding into the present, unpunished and unacknowledged. The world allowed this to happen, not once but repeatedly, with eyes open and hands outstretched. Unit 731 did not end with fire. It endures in silence, in denial, in the comfort of forgetting. But beneath the soil, the truth is restless. It cannot rot, it cannot fade, and it will never stop demanding to be heard. And one day, when the ground is turned again and the bones rise to the surface, the question will remain: why did we let them vanish without a name? Why did we let them die twice, once in agony and again in silence?